Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone back from the break. We have a great session coming up entitled Transforming Traditional Industries Through Remote Monitoring featuring Nate Wang. Nate is an enterprise account executive focused on new mobility, including micromobility, shared mobility, LEVs, mobility as a service, and electrification, as well as enabling new business models and more sustainable transportation options with IoT. Nate holds a BA from the University of California, Berkeley, and currently resides in Portugal. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Nate.
Hey everyone, and welcome. It's so glad to have you all here with us digitally from around the world. And I'm very excited to be with our panelists today. We have three folks from three distinct organizations that we'll be talking to on the topic of remote monitoring. I'd like to welcome Justice Reed, who is head of hardware for Amper Technologies out of Chicago. Justice, are you on the line?
Yep.
Fantastic. Also, Sivaprasad, Akasam, he's joining us from Intellihot out of Austin, Texas.
Hi.
And our third panelist joining us from Stockholm, Sweden, Daniel Wilson with MTR Nordic Group. Daniel, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
All right, glad to have you all here, and looking forward to this conversation. Before we get into it, I figured I would just pass it over and allow you each to describe a little bit about your organizations in elevator pitch, if you will, since you guys each focus on IoT in such a different way. So maybe Daniel, would you mind just telling us a little bit about MTR Nordic Group?
Sure thing. Yes. Nate mentioned, I work at MTR, and we are the traffic operator and responsible for the maintenance within the metro and commuter trains in Stockholm. We are working in several other places around the world as well, Hong Kong, London, and Melbourne, for some examples. I work as a project manager within the maintenance of the vehicles, and we are now focusing on digitalization and IoT, mainly on transmission of information from vehicles to wayside. That's where Particle is one of our suppliers of units or equipment for our units that we are using at the moment in a project.
Great. Siva, passing it over to you.
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon. Intellihot is a high-tech energy company. We are looking to transform how energy is consumed and converted to hot water or space needs. We make water heaters today for commercial properties such as Disney resorts or large restaurants. We are happy to partner with Particle in this journey of connectivity, where we believe hot water is important, and knowing what your equipment is doing before it fails is where Particle helps us in our customers.
Thanks. Justice.
Hey everybody, my name is Justice Reed and I'm with Amper Technologies. So Amper is an operational tool for manufacturers. So we are a software tool that is powered by IoT hardware that itself is powered with Particle. So what we do is we monitor industrial equipment for manufacturers using an IoT device that measures electricity consumption in real time. That hardware gets installed in under 10 minutes as opposed to competitors being more like 5 or 6 months. And that data is streamed in real time, converted into meaningful information about what that machine is doing using some proprietary stuff in the cloud. And so we're an IoT-enabled software product that helps manufacturers stay ahead of the curve as far as their operational processes and performance.
Great, guys. And what I'm excited about today with this panel is that each of you kind of holds a unique space when it comes to IoT. I mean, Shiva, your team is focused on creating an end product. Justice, you're helping a lot of manufacturers and folks who are in the process world optimize those operations. And Daniel, you're kind of doing some of that the same internally rather than looking externally with your customers. So I'm looking forward to getting your perspectives here. You know, maybe we can start from the beginning, and Shiva, you could tell us a little bit about you know, your approach to IoT as a product creator and what helped to inform how you guys are creating the Intellihot system today.
So the Intellihot stands for intelligent and hot. And hot water, when it works, is great. Nobody gives it a second thought. But when it doesn't, it creates a cascade of problems, meaning the restaurants cannot be open. You have yelling and screaming customers at the front desk in a hotel. And that's a lot of inefficiencies in the system. While we have improved the efficiency of the equipment itself, the process of breaking and fixing it is still a long ways to go. With particle-enabled products, with both the Wi-Fi and the cellular product, by having that, we are able to take the data from the operation of the heater and predict when things are going to go or need maintenance or may fail. And we are able to dispatch people and spare parts to take care of the problem before it happens, so that the end customer really is seamless to them. They focus on their core business, whether it's a restaurant or a hotel, and it's all in the background. And that's the reason why we have grown quite a bit, both stateside and otherwise. And we take an Apple type of approach where the user interface should be easy. All the things are done in the intelligence gathering is done in the background. And coming from a Caterpillar background, things have to be very robust. And with the technology available to us, it has to be very easy to use.
Your background in that regard actually reminded me a lot of when I spoke with Justice. And Justice, you come from a Boeing background, and both of these organizations, Caterpillar and Boeing, are certainly ones that I think of when we think of things like Industry 4.0 and digital transformation. But what struck me is that you both are taking a very elegant and somewhat simplified approach to IoT. Justice, can you tell us a little bit about how you guys are taking your product to market?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nate. We live in a world that is full of buzzwords right now. Everything is a buzzword. Everybody tries to turn everything into a buzzword, even if it isn't already. Every company has their own unique buzzword for the same thing that everybody else has that's not new. And buzzwords in general don't help anything. It's just marketing. Not that marketing is bad, but they don't fundamentally help your customer. And what a lot of people think is that data helps people. Just automatically data helps people. But I think the unfortunate reality is that data has now become a buzzword as well. And so when you say data, what do you mean, right? What does somebody say when they say like, oh, I want more data on my operations or my manufacturing process, or maybe that's, your home appliances or whatever it is. Data sounds good in theory. In practice, the question that we should all have is it helpful? And does it, in a business standpoint, does it make me more money? Right? Or does it prevent me from losing money? Because if it doesn't do those things, then it doesn't matter how much data you have, it's not impacting your business bottom line. So there's a bit of option paralysis when it comes to data. So let's say you have the best system in the world for collecting all the data you want in whatever your respective industry is. That's awesome. And maybe in 50 years, when big data is just, the thing, and our AI systems are amazing and perfect and can predict everything, that's awesome. But for right now, what does that data give you? And so the kind of the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 principle, says like 80% of the opportunity ahead of you is probably found in 20% of the problems or data that's in front of you. And so that's a big focus of Amper, and also a personal philosophy focus for myself when it comes to IoT is, let's not gather data for the sake of gathering data. Let's gather data that has actionable impact and is relatively intuitive to interpret. And so how do we make sure that customers are actually getting value from the extra data that we're giving them? And so the focus is on actionable data and metrics, and finding the balance between simplicity and flexibility. So it has to be simple enough that you can adopt it easily, flexible enough that it fits into your workflow and fits into your understanding and whatever your business model is. But at the end of the day, all of this stuff like Industry 4.0, digital twin, these are the goals that we're shooting for. We're all shooting for that. Us at Amper, we want all of our customers to truly get to that point where their operations are an Industry 4.0 operation. However, for most companies, especially smaller and traditionally under-resourced companies, that is not a realistic thing because they don't have the resources to take advantage of that data, and it uses human resources and human skill to do something with data. And so what we try to do is we try to break it down, keep it a little bit simpler to start so that people can get their foot in the door and start actually seeing results without having to dive deep and pay millions and millions of dollars into something they don't know how to use.
Yeah, and the way in which you guys are doing that is actually a very simple kind of universal hardware approach, which I really liked. And I've had the pleasure of working with Daniel and the MTR Nordic group. And it reminded me a lot of how they are approaching their use case in specific. So Daniel, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what drove your organization on this IoT journey and how you approach that from the type of data that you were looking to gather in the first place.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nate. We started off with having we are reporting energy consumption annually, and that process of getting that information is pretty much downloaded manually today. So we started discussing how can we do this more efficient and in the same way make the information, the quality of the information more secure. So we started discussing what if we could use some sort of communication unit to get the information sent instead of manually downloaded. And therefore we started talking to Particle. We first off started using a Wi-Fi solution. With that idea, we thought of every time the vehicle actually enters the depot, we could connect to the Wi-Fi inside the depot itself. And then we discussed it even further, and we thought of what if we could work more actively with this information and start using it for eco driving or those type of things. So we started discussing a 3G solution instead, where we could keep track of the information all the time, and we didn't have to depend on the actual network areas. So we started discussing that instead, and first off, as I mentioned, we wanted to reduce man hours and make the actual work by getting the report ready more efficient. But since we started working on or talking about eco driving, we could find more potential in savings and changing driving patterns and everything that comes with it, smooth riding and feeling more environmental friendly and making it like a more pleasant journey for all the travelers. And that's pretty much how we started off, and we are now in the phase where we are installing the actual units in vehicles. So we are facing some of the problems that Justice was talking about how to implement it, what to use the data, and how to make sure that we can get the savings and potential that we can see with it.
Yeah, it's interesting to see so many of these use cases start off with one focus and how they evolve over time. So you just mentioned, you're on the hook to report energy consumption to the Stockholm Transit Authority on an annual basis. This is sort of a manual process, and that's where this all started for you guys. But I understand that you're focused now on expanding that program to encompass preventative maintenance and some driver behavior and energy consumption characteristics. I want to touch on that in a second here, but I think that this type of gradual unlocking of additional value over time is something I've seen a lot of. And Justice, I hope that you could spend a few moments just speaking on your guys' approach to that. I really liked how you guys work with your clients on helping them to realize that end goal in a phased approach.
Absolutely, Nate. Yeah, I mean, what we found is that especially in traditional industries, there's a lot of inertia in behavior, and so part of customer success involves behavior change. I know we're going to talk a bit more about behavior change later, but keeping things manageable for our customers is a big factor in them being able to be successful. And it also enables them to maximize value by building off of things one at a time. So you really need strong building blocks with some fundamental data, because it builds trust in your system, and it helps to start the gears turning in people's minds that, hey, I can actually make some changes and things will get better. Like, this product is good for me. And so keeping things manageable is the name of the game. And so what we do at Amper is we actually, when a customer signs on with us, most of the time, we actually start them off with the most basic feature set. So they're just seeing things like utilization and the timelines of data. We just gather some data for a week. Then we take it one step further and we say, okay, now that you can see your data, you know that there's all these periods of downtime between when your machines are running and when they're not, and the customer can see that in real time and historically. And so we'll say, all right, now we're going to enable alerts. So now you can get a text message or email alert when your machine goes down. So now you can hopefully respond faster, and hopefully we're going to be able to see these things actually decrease over the next few weeks, that these lengths of time are going to get shorter because we're responding faster, because we have greater awareness of what's going on. So we do that, and then we actually take a look at that data in our analysis features, and we say, hey, like, let's take a look at how we performed here. This is how much time you saved using this feature based on this data. And then we take another step further. And so at that point, data without context is not very good data. So context is a really key part of data. So to gather additional context, we actually use a tablet app or a desktop machine app for folks by the machines. And one of the basic features we enable next to them is just a call button feature. So instead of, Joe operator having to go run and find Bob, the maintenance guy, wherever he is in this massive facility, he just presses a button, and then Bob gets a text message say, hey, press this link to claim this call. And then now, not only is it easier for the operator, so it's making their life easier so they want to use it, but we're now tracking information and data about all levels of that. So now our customer can go and see, hey, this is how long Bob took to respond. This is how long we're responding on average. And we can start to identify gaps and issues, make adjustments, and ultimately improve that metric. So then again, we take a look in our analytics features and we say, hey, this is how we performed before. These are the improvements that we made. And this is, another place where they can trust. And ultimately, when we have those periods of downtime, when the machine isn't down, there's a reason for why that machine isn't down. Some reasons are natural, some reasons are things that are problems. And so we have our operators also label what the reason was. So the customer can set up a tiered set of reasons. So the operator can just click, high level category 1 on the tablet, and then click the sub reason, and then that's stored, and it takes 5 seconds. Now that you have all that data, you clicked it for a few months, you can see trends. What is actually causing me to not be running at my absolute highest operational efficiency? And that's when we come back to them and say, all right, looking at this data, we see some very clear opportunities here that you may not have known before. So now let's tackle some of these big ones. Let's start doing some long-term projects, making some long-term decisions. So we're going from the shortest term, smallest bite size, and we're getting bigger and bigger, getting greater and greater investment from our customer, until finally they're using Amper as a justification for long-term improvement projects and even capital expenditure.
I love that story, and it reminds me a lot of a goal I had, last year, getting a better handle on my finances, getting everything into Mint. You guys sound like the Mint of manufacturing, where, first let's stream it all, then we can tag things and set alerts, and realize that you're spending too much on Uber Eats, but it's all for a good cause. Shiva, your position is a little bit different, where you're not working with products that are already deployed out in the field. You have the sort of position where you're actually delivering that end product. How does this play out for you? What is the value that a customer would realize day one adopting the Intellihot system, and what's unlocked over time with the intelligence that's a part of that system?
So I think there are a couple of things here. One of the things that Justice touched on is about efficiency, not just equipment efficiency, but human efficiency. Meaning, I don't want to make calls and wait for somebody. That's just very inefficient and painful at times. The other one is about data, right? Data, what we do is we convert the data into information into something actionable. A good example would be, if we tell you you have taken 1,000 more right turns than left turns, as a driver, you'd go, what do I do with that information, right? Or the data? Then it might, if you translate that a little bit peel that a little bit further, you say your right tire is going to rotate more, hence it needs to be replaced sooner. And if you are able to tell them, hey, I have a appointment with your car dealer, and I have the part ready for you on Thursday the 15th, that is what we are aiming for. So equipment that leaves our factory has all that intelligence built in to say how often does it run, based on depending on the application. It may run harder for shorter durations of time or longer durations of like a highway miles versus city driving. So we are able to differentiate that, and what Justice calls the information, the data layer, we call the faster pigeon. So connectivity allows us to tell something is wrong in a matter of seconds versus somebody going down there and figuring it out. So faster pigeon is step one. The step two where we look at is look at the wear parameters and be able to say what part is wrong, who has the part, when does it need to be replaced. So that is the level that we want to be at, so that the uptime is extremely high. And that allows us, the restaurant owner, to focus on, hey, what dishes do people like? Is my food, do I have the ingredients necessary for this? Are my tables clean? That's the value proposition that they bring and they need to focus on. Same way with large hotels or resorts, they want to make sure the hallways are clean, the air conditioning is working. Hot water should be the last thing that they need to worry about. That happens in the background, works flawlessly. And that's where Intellihot comes in.
Yeah, what I was struck by when we were chatting about this topic, I didn't realize just how much water is wasted on a municipal level, and a lot of this is by activities that we sort of take for granted. You know, I wake up in the morning, I turn my tap on to brush my teeth and wash my face. It might take 20, 30, maybe a minute before the hot water actually is delivered at the temperature that I want it. And can you tell us a little bit about how you guys have addressed this? Helping me as a user, not necessarily having to change my behavior, but actually end up saving not only on energy but water.
Yeah. So the good analogy for that is, you have a Prius on one hand, which is very high fuel efficiency, but from a performance of 0 to 60, you'd prefer maybe a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, depending on which side you like. So imagine if you're able to combine both, meaning fuel efficiency and performance, right? So we don't want to it's difficult to change human behavior. So you turn the tap on, wet your brush, you want to go brushing. Do I need to close the tap? It feels like a lot of work, right? And it's a change in behavior. What we look at is, when is water being used, and deliver the hot water to the user when they open it. So it does a couple of things. One, you're not wasting energy when it's not needed. And you, as a user, when you open the tap, you want hot water. And cities spend enormous amount of energy cleaning up the water and delivering it to you. And we are just dumping that water back into the drain. In some places, you actually pay for the drain, and it's just an enormous waste. In other words, efficiencies. And we felt that is, if we can do without changing behavior, save water, save energy, while delivering a very high level of comfort, that's a no-brainer from a sales perspective. That helps the business, helps us.
Yeah, and Justice, when you guys are working with your teams out in the field, you're working with external clients and customers, many of whom are in a manufacturing setting where there are these patterns that exist, and it sounds almost as if you're helping them to understand those patterns and then be able to affect change. Can you walk us a little bit more through that process of when your team starts to engage with them, and maybe an example of a customer that you've worked with on that front?
Yeah, so especially in traditional industries, there is a lot of tribal knowledge, right? And so people that have been doing the same job for 30 years, they have a really good understanding of what they're doing, and legitimately so. They're good at what they do, and that's a good thing, and that's why they're valuable. And unfortunately, those people are aging out of the workforce coming up soon. A lot of that skill is going away. But even when those folks do know what they're doing, sometimes it doesn't give the most accurate picture of what's actually happening. So we had a customer that we did a case study with where the plant manager suspected, so essentially manufacturers have shifts. So different people come in for different shifts, and you're not always scheduled for 24/7. But this one customer had 2 different shifts, and they had a 4-hour like maintenance and prep window in between those 2 shifts. And so that was, you know, just to make sure everything's running and ready to go. And so the plant manager suspected that window, that the second shift was wasting a lot of time after setting up due to that extra period. And the leadership was like, no, that's not true. It's not worth making a change. We don't want to change our shift schedule. People will complain. And before Amper, the company had about 40 to 50% uptime and really drastic swings day to day in how they performed. And so that plant manager had us install on their equipment to start measuring things. And so he proposed a trial to actually move where that 4-hour window was and to measure the difference. And the week 1 of making that change, they had 60 to 65% uptime. So a 20 to 25% increase in uptime, and it was consistent day to day. And so the plant manager wanted to further, you know, double down on that stuff. So they started using the downtime alerts and tracking the time to first piece from the beginning of the shift. So exactly what that time at the beginning of the shift before they started being productive. And what they found was they had over 70% uptime, and they reduced their startup scrap. So they actually increased their quality as a part of this as well. And they eliminated weekend overtime that they had to be paying workers for. And so obviously the leadership was convinced by that and made the change. But, you know, if you went with the tribal knowledge, they would never have done that, because it doesn't make sense, right? Or that one guy who has the control is like, nah, I don't want to do that. That's not worth it. You know, we're going to have problems. But at the end of the day, when you listen to the data, you can get results that really impact your bottom line. But you have to listen to the right data, and you have to do it in the right way.
Yeah, and you know, Daniel, when we were chatting, I was surprised to learn that the trains in Stockholm are actually driven by conductors. And I thought, you know, as a passenger, I just get on, it's automated for me at least, but there's someone behind the wheel. You guys are looking at doing something similar with your driver behavior program. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, so we are, as I mentioned before, we are now in the phase where we are actually installing the equipment. But of course, we'll discuss what is the next step for us after this, since we can from one day to another start collecting information and get more frequently up-to-date information on driving patterns and energy consuming aspects of driving and so on. So we are starting discussing how do we inform the drivers themselves and give them feedback on the actual driving part. We're sort of discussing how to do this smooth introduction of it. We don't want to scare anyone with from one day to another implementing a sort of a monitor for them to see what they actually are consuming. So we want to sort of ease into the process of starting follow up the information by first maybe monthly basis, just start talking about the numbers, and then when we find some sort of a scenario where we don't decrease the energy consumed, we follow up more often, or then in one stage maybe we will end up in having a sort of a monitor in the actual, beside the driver, so we can actually monitor it in sort of real time. And of course, as you mentioned, Nate, we are still driven manually by a driver, and in the metro in Stockholm there's about 600 drivers, so it's the human factor of actually introducing a change in the human behavior, not only the actual data collection. I think data collection is kind of the easy part in this project. We are facing another topics after this in the next step, when we will actually find the change and implement some new techniques. And of course, some drivers will do it. It will probably be driving very well already. Some of them will be struggling, and that's the problems we are facing, or the opportunity and huge savings as well.
Yeah, and when it comes to behavioral change, it's not just the drivers that you're working with. You embarked on a fairly long journey with the organization itself in order to sort of build the business case and get the buy-in to greenlight this project. I understand it's sort of the first project for MTR Nordic Group when it comes to the maintenance with relation to IoT. I think that in speaking with a variety of different customers, this is a potential slippery spot in the process for them. And I'd love if you could shed some light on, how you did that within the organization and were able to get the buy-in that you needed to greenlight this project.
Sorry, I didn't really get the full sentence. Sorry, Nate.
Yeah, no worries. Can you walk us through building the business case for this project and how you were able to get your leadership team to sign off on that?
Yeah, so we started off with finding a possible solution to actually reduce the man-hours in reporting and collecting the information on energy consumed. So I started off with the idea of, okay, let's make a break-even business case with because that's pretty much where we ended up when calculating on the man hours we can reduce and installing equipment. And as the management should, they asked us politely not to be that shy and wanted us to find more more potential savings. And that's where we started discussing, okay, so if we work more actively with the information and starting discussing actual interfaces, human interfaces with the information, that's where we can find not only reporting the numbers that is on, we can also start working with the numbers to get them decreasing year by year with actually, changing patterns in driving patterns and the behavior, and learn more things. What are the actual aspects that are consuming energy for us? We think that we know. I think we know a lot of the aspects, but we can still find more. I'm not really sure. We can find, let's say, the interface between train and rail and infrastructure questions. So this is just we're starting digging into this area, and we are really looking forward to finding new areas we can find.
Yeah, it felt like this is a philosophy or an investment for your organization. Obviously wanting the numbers to work in the immediate term, but understanding that there is probably greater opportunity that exists there than maybe even is visible today. And I think there's challenges depending on when organizations start this. And Justice, we kind of talked about the different organizations that you work with and sort of the equipment that is available today that comes fully loaded with all the bells and whistles. But the reality being that many manufacturers are working on really old hardware. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you help them think about IoT and adopting a technology suite like Amper?
Yeah, absolutely. Adopting new technologies is scary, and it's a big challenge for an industry that's fundamentally driven on running the same way all the time. And and with that, like behavior and process, those are mechanisms that businesses survive and die by, most things. If you've got good processes, you're going to succeed really well. And if your processes are struggling, you might get lucky in the short term, but long term, you're going to really have a hard time. And so when it comes to adoption and getting customers to buy in, there's a lot of barriers that exist, especially in traditional industries and specifically in manufacturing. There's a couple different ones, because you can go buy a new piece of equipment that has all the bells and whistles and brand new IoT connected. You can connect it into your infrastructure and know like every little detail about the way it's running. You can see every single internal signal. Sounds cool, and going back to what I said about information overload, sure, some of that stuff, right, is just not useful. Let's just say we throw out all the unhelpful information. We just keep the really good, simple, useful information from that. What's the problem, right? And the problem is two things. One, most manufacturers don't just buy new equipment. Equipment is the single largest capital expenditure that they're going to have, except for maybe their building. And getting new equipment is not trivial. Equipment, well maintained, should last a very, very long time. And so if you have, let's say you have 80% new equipment that could be IoT enabled, but you have 20% legacy equipment that's older and can't be connected easily, then you can implement all these new changes and processes on the new equipment. But if your employees are spending still 20% of the time on equipment where none of that applies, they're going to have a really hard time adopting that process fully. And you're going to have a really hard time getting organizational buy-in, because you're going to say, well, what about these, right? What about that? Or like, how do you really make a decision if you don't have all of the context and all of the data, especially when you're making comparative decisions? And so that's barrier number one. Barrier number two is, and I know Zach mentioned this earlier on in the conference, that on-premise stuff is dying. On-premise stuff is very costly to maintain. Especially the small companies, have IT consultant groups that are off-site, and they have to pay a lot of money to come on site, make changes. It's a huge investment. Even putting devices on Wi-Fi, we have found, has been a big barrier for some of our customers. We'll float the option because we give them an option of both Wi-Fi and cellular, and they'll say like, oh, we definitely can't do Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, like, we won't even start the conversation about it. It's a whole different category of investment for them. But cellular with a web app, they're like, oh, I could do that, right? That's not too bad, right? So there's a lot of bad taste in people's mouths when it comes to IT integration, on-premise integration, and current solutions. No matter how technologically advanced they are, they tend to require a lot of heavy integration. So using an integration-less a solution allows us to bypass a lot of the big concerns traditional industries have in that. And ultimately, when it comes to adoption, your product must make your customer's life better in an active way. If your product doesn't actually make at a visceral, empathetic level, your customer has to feel like their life is easier because of your product. And if you don't do that, then it's going to force a hammer from above to get them to do anything with it. No matter how strong the hammer, you're not going to get results when your hammer is your motivational tool. You want people to be motivated by, hey, this is easy to use. This helps me. This saves me time. This makes my job less stressful. This means that I don't have to, basically go through lots of levels to get information that I need. I can just know the information without having to bother people or worry about trust. And so that's my biggest thought on behavior, is you got to make it actually easy for your customer, and you got to make their life easier with it.
Yeah, jumping off from your point there on how expensive legacy equipment is and can be to replace, Shiva, can you talk to us about the pitch that you give to, that 1,000-room hotel that might have a bunch of boilers in their basement, and how are they going to justify a switch over to an Intellihot system?
So, I like how Justice put it. The change cannot be incremental. You cannot go from 90% to 92% efficiency improvement and expect a huge change. So the barriers that you want to make their life a lot easier. So the pitch becomes very simple. We want to be a easy button, stealing from Staples. We want a simple, one-stop shop for everything. That's within that mechanical room, whether it is intelligence about equipment or product safety or compliance. So we are able to bring that level of ease to them, and we offer both Wi-Fi and cellular depending on the level of IT people they have. And typically restaurants get maybe a 2-hour window to change out a water heater. So they just want to plug in water, power, gas, and off they go. And that's where the cellular product, the E-Series, makes it phenomenally easy to adopt. And that's what gets, I plugged it in, it worked right from the get-go.
That's great. Each of you guys have had a unique journey when it comes to IoT. And if you were to look back at yourself a year or 2 years, you guys have been on this for a while now, what is some advice that you would give to your earlier self as you embark down this path? And Shiva, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think engaging with Particle was good in terms of finding other partners. And fail fast. I mean, the customer, think a lot through what the customer journey looks like, because ultimately it's a business proposition. How do we make this life easier, not just from a pricing perspective, but convenience and ease of adoption? I think that drives the whole business case for it.
Daniel, do you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Yeah, if I were to talk about myself a year ago, I would always say something like, don't be afraid to use your imagination when calculating user cases or thinking of how to use this information. Just, yeah, use your imagination. And yeah, that's it's pretty much a one-liner. I'll give myself.
go big or go home, I suppose.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, probably something like that. As you mentioned, our journey took a while, and I think if we would have aimed higher, we would probably have come a bit further today's date. But yeah, aim higher.
That's great. Justice, how about yourself? Yeah, a few different things. I think number one and the most important. So we're a venture-backed startup, and so we're trying to grow really, really quickly, but it's still in a sustainable way. And I think one of the most important ways that you can do that successfully is by leveraging existing resources. I think that is the single biggest tool that any engineer, any product manager, any company has. Is a lot of people have done the legwork for you on a lot of things. A lot of people have gone before you, whether that's networking and learning from people in similar industries or that are maybe a year or two ahead of you, or in the case of Particle, so we use third-party modules as much as possible for our product. So we use Particle as a third-party module for connectivity. We use an Arduino-based third-party module for some of our data collection stuff. And by doing those two things, it enables us to offload the risk onto Particle and onto the open source Arduino ecosystem. And that enables us to actually focus on the value and customer proposition. Like Shiva said, like that is the core thing. If your customer proposition isn't good, if your business case isn't good, if you haven't listened well to your customer, then nothing that you do is going to matter at the end of the day. Your product is going to fail, even if it connects perfectly and all that stuff. So you want to get that, all the connectivity and all the technical stuff, you want to take care of that and offload as much risk as you can while still maintaining control, so that you can really focus on the customer experience. And then the final thing would just be along those lines. Everything's about your customer. Your customer should drive every single decision. So at Boeing, I used to work doing requirements management. And so we would, look at the requirements for the airplane and help enforce that the airplane is being built to those requirements. And the same thing is true for every product. Start with requirements, start with what your customer needs, and then work from there.
That's great, guys. And I want to, just say thanks for being here with us, Daniel, Shiva, Justice, and sharing your stories along this journey. It's been great to work with you, and we certainly look forward to continuing working together. For you in the audience, if you would like to interact with these gentlemen, we do have the Discord app up, so come visit us at discord.particle.io. There is a forum set up for this session in specific, so if you have questions, I encourage you guys to hop in there and continue the discussion and conversation. Up next, we do have a customer case study coming on with Aura Air, and so stick around for that, and I'll pass it back to Michael Gleason to continue on to the next session. Thanks again, guys.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Nate. Terrific session. Thank you, panelists.